Layering stencils are quickly becoming one of the card making industry's most innovative designs. These stencils allow you to create elaborate depth within your projects using simple tools like stencils and a blending brush. Want to see this in action? Stay tuned.
You are what I'm looking for. I know what I'm looking for.
Okay, so the stencil I'm going to use today comes from the Gina Designs Winter Foliage Card Kit. There is a 4-piece poinsettia layering stencil. And I'm going to pull this out and I'm going to create a card project using this stencil. So this stencil has 4 pieces that creates a very large poinsettia. So I've got a piece of Gina Designs heavy base weight cardstock. This is 110 pound smooth cardstock. And I'm going to tape this to my stencil. Now I've got it lined up so that my stencil is in the bottom corner so that when I go to attach the other stencils, it will line up easily. So I'm putting an extra piece of tape on the back of my cardstock, and then I've also got a silicone mat here. This is going to help me keep my work surface clean and help my cardstock from shifting around. So I'm going to pull out some Gina Designs ink cubes here. I'm going to use the Gina Designs carnation inks that are meant for layering images like this. So I'm going to pull out some blending brushes, and I've got this little mat here that I use to clean my blending brushes. This is also made from silicone and it's intended to clean makeup brushes. I found this little tool at the Dollarama for $4. Sometimes I find after using my ink blending brushes and setting them down and not using them for a few days, the bristles kind of harden a little bit. So that just means I probably didn't clean them very well and there was extra ink sitting on the bristles. By rubbing my brushes into this mat, it helps loosen up those bristles and takes off that extra ink. And then I can just clean it with a baby wipe or rinse it off in the sink. So I like to have this handy whenever I'm ink blending. So I've got all of my things set up here to start inking up the first layer of this poinsettia. I'm using Gina Designs Light Carnation. And I'm going to ink up this stencil really well, and I just want to get a nice solid color. I like to highlight those edges just a little bit. And then I'm going to peel this up and I'm going to grab the next stencil and line it up into the corner of my cardstock, and it should line up perfectly right over top of that poinsettia. And I still had my adhesive taped to my cardstock so I can just stick my stencil down. I'm going to pull in Gina Designs Medium Carnation and ink up the second layer of this stencil. So I'm getting a nice saturated ink here, and then I'm going to grab the dark carnation ink and a small detail blending brush. And this blending brush is going to help me get into the little corners. I just want to highlight the edges where the petals sort of come out from underneath the other petals, just to create a little bit more depth. So I'm just going to ink up those areas with just a little bit of that darker carnation. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to move to the next stencil. Now I went out of order here. I put on the wrong stencil. I put on the 4th layer rather than the 3rd, but that's okay. It doesn't really matter. We can come back and finish it. So I'm adding the 4th layer on here, and this is all the veins for the poinsettia. So I'm lining that up into the corner of my cardstock, and then I'm going to ink up with that dark carnation ink. And I'm going to change my brush out for a red blending brush because this color is more red than it is pink. So I don't want to contaminate my pink blending brush. So I'm going to fill in all of those areas with that dark carnation and make sure I get a nice saturated color. And then this image is really starting to come to life here. So when I peel up that layer, I then realized that I missed the 3rd layer. So I'm going to grab that stencil and I'm just going to line this one up over top of the image. This one won't line up into the corner of my cardstock, but it's very easy to line up. You can see right where it's supposed to go. So I get that taped onto my cardstock here, and I'll go back to the medium carnation and ink up the center of that flower. And then once that's done, I'm going to add a little bit more of the dark carnation into the center of the flower with this small blending brush, just to give it that little extra highlight and create that extra depth and dimension in the flower. All right, so the final piece here is going to be the little dots in the center of my poinsettia. And this just lines up any old way. There's no specific way. It just goes right in the middle of the flower. And I'll get that taped onto my cardstock. And then I'm going to use the Gina Designs Dark Spruce ink. And I ink up this brush very heavily and fill in those little dots. Now at the end of this, I wasn't quite a fan of that dark green there. I'm going to come back later and fix this. But anyways, this flower is absolutely gorgeous. So I'm going to fussy cut this out. I'm going to take my time and use some scissors and just go around this poinsettia. It's really easy to cut out, but because I used the heavyweight cardstock, it is a little bit more finicky. So I'm just going to take my time and cut around that flower and cut the whole image out. Took me a few minutes, but it turned out really nice. And I'm not an expert fussy cutter. I don't practice it a lot. But the trick to fussy cutting is moving your image rather than your scissors, kind of keeping your scissors in one direction and moving the cardstock around. So I'm happy with that result. So now we're going to move into creating a background, sort of a backdrop for this poinsettia to sit on. So I pulled in my stencil book, and this is just a scrapbook album that I store all of my stencils in. I find it really easy to flip through and visually see what sort of stencils I have, and then I like that black paper in behind the stencils. It helps them pop out. So I picked this Gina Designs Lush Leaves stencil, and I'm going to get this taped onto my cardstock. I brought in my silicone mat again, so it helps to keep my work surface clean and helps to hold my stencil in place. I'm going to grab the Gina Designs Light Spruce ink, and I'm going to ink up this entire background with that light spruce. So I want to make sure that I get good even coverage here. And then once that background is fully saturated with that ink, I'm going to come back in with a fine detail blending brush and use the medium spruce ink. And I'm going to sort of highlight the veins on these leaves. I'm going to start at the base of each of the leaves and just highlight down the center, just to create a little bit more depth. It really does make a huge impact on images when you add this extra depth. So it doesn't look like much yet, but once we peel up that stencil and reveal the image that we have behind, you'll see that sort of two-tone look in those leaves. And then I'm going to grab my blending brush again with that light spruce, and I'm just going to ever so slightly ink up that white cardstock just so it's not so stark white. I kind of want this to fade into the background. I want the poinsettia to take center stage. So I'll tone that down just a little bit. Once I'm happy with that result, I'm going to trim this background down. So I've grabbed my paper trimmer here, and I'm trimming this piece down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. And you can save these little scraps to decorate the inside of your card. I'm not going to worry about that today. Sometimes I do. I add those inside of my cards. Then I've got ahead and cut out a black layer that is 1/8 of an inch bigger than this piece of cardstock, just to create a nice black layer. I'm channeling my inner Gina K here. So I'm getting this background lined up on my black cardstock, and then I'm going to adhere this piece down to a white card base. My card base is a top folding 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card. I'll get that background centered on this card base. Then I'm going to figure out where I'd like to put my poinsettia. I've got some foam tape here that I've loaded up to the back of this poinsettia, and I'll peel off that release paper and find the perfect position for this poinsettia. And it overhangs a little bit over the edge of my cardstock. I'll just come in with my scissors and trim away any of that excess that's sticking out. You could leave this and put it inside of a larger envelope, but for today I'm just going to trim these away. Alright, next I need a sentiment for this card. Inside of my card kit, there was a sheet of sentiment strips, which I really like. They're ready to go for you to make a quick and easy card. So I have some of these cut out. This one says wishing you joy, and I've just got a black alcohol marker, and I'm just going to run this marker over the edge of my sentiment just to mask the fact that this is white cardstock. So it looks like black cardstock with white heat embossing when you do this. So I'm going to pop this sentiment up on some little foam squares here. I'll pull off those little release papers, and I'm going to place this right over top of the point of my poinsettia. I'm just going to let that poinsettia kind of run underneath my sentiment. It creates a nice flow. So now we're going to fix those center dots. I've got some matte gold pearls here and a jewel picker and some adhesive. And I'm just going to apply my adhesive in little tiny dots over top of the dots of this poinsettia. And in my little mix of pearls, there are multiple different sizes. So it's perfect because the little dots on this poinsettia are all different sizes. So I just went through and I picked the size of the pearl that matches the dot on the middle of my poinsettia. And then I added a few extra pearls up at the top, scattered around the sentiment. And then the last thing that I wanted to do to this card was add some shimmer. I have a Tonic Studios Nouveau Shimmer pen, and this just adds such an impressive amount of glitter. So I went ahead and painted my entire poinsettia, and I painted my sentiment too. And so you can see when I turn it in the light here how that poinsettia really glitters and shines. I love the way that this looks. And that's it. This card project is complete. I hope that this video has inspired you to go through your stash, pull out some stencils, and have some fun. Thank you so much for joining me today. Coming up on screen is another project using the Gina Designs Winter Foliage Card Kit. If you need some more inspiration, you'll find it there. Make sure you hit that like button if you enjoyed today's content, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Have yourself a lovely day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!